Hey everybody, can you hear me? Oh, sorry, I've got to... Sorry about that. Two cameras, it gets a little confusing. I forgot to turn the volume off on that one. Hey, welcome Kaz, KZ. Oh, KZ, you're welcome for the dishcloth. Is it the round pattern that you're knitting? And Kaz, you're finding it hard to knit round dishcloths. We've got a pattern for that. Have you downloaded it? Are you giving that a try? Oh, you're from England. Hey, hello. So good to have you guys here. So let's jump right in and see who else joins us and get your knitting questions ready. We'll be taking those in a few minutes. Let me get my screen here. See if we can get this switched. Okay, there we go. Can you see my screen? Good. I wanted to start by just chatting about TKGA. A lot of people have asked about the Master Hand Knitting program and things like that. And of course, they offer that, but they also offer lots of other things. When you're a member, they have virtual guild meetings every month where you can chat with other knitters in the guild, and they have presentations. There was just one this past week, Sweater Knitting Success with Celia McAdam Cahill. That was a really nice class, and they took questions and things like that. They also have back issues of Cast On magazine, which is full of good patterns, technical articles that will help you improve your knitting skills. And they also offer mini courses that are, I think, $25 each. You can see there's a whole list of them there. So if there's something particular that you really want to work on, what you do is you knit different swatches and you actually send them in and they get evaluated. Oh, let's see if I can get myself back on the screen here. There we go. Hey. So TKGA is a great resource, especially for knitters who just want to further their skills and things like that. Oh, Kaz, you can't read knitting patterns. I have a video about that. I'll put a link down below later on. I can't go search for it now. Is there something in particular about knitting patterns that you struggle with? But I know the video I just did one this past week about reading knitting instructions. That might really help. I can't think of what the name of it is off the top of my head, but I just shared it just this week, I think, the last one I posted about reading instructions, and we dive deep into how to read a pattern. So go look for that. I'll put a link in after. If you can't find it, you can come back to it, but I break it down, all of the things that go into reading knitting instructions. So that might help you. The best thing to do is to just download. I've got a lot of free patterns. Download some and just start working through them. There's some with tutorials that you can use those to guide you as you go. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to mention while we're waiting to see if anybody else joins us today. I do have a section of short videos. They're less than 30 seconds each. I'll put a link for that down there too. But sometimes you just need a quick refresher on something, like you know how to do the long tail cast on, but you can't remember quite how to do it. So you don't want to watch a 10-minute video on the long tail cast on. You just want something quick. And that's what these videos are for. They're called shorts. So they're less than 60 seconds. So I'm trying to build up a good library of quick things, knitting tips and things like that, techniques for casting on or joining yarns, knitting in the round, things like that, just to demonstrate them really quickly. So I'll put a link down below, but if you go to the Nerdy Knitting YouTube page and look through the playlists, there's one that's just for shorts. Oh, KZ, you're welcome. I'm glad you find the video library helpful. Yeah, I'm working hard to get that built up, but video is a new experience, and especially doing this live stream, this is a lot of technical things to learn too. Okay, well, there's a bit of a chat. And I do have a question on the community page, if anybody wants to hop over there and answer that. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger. There we go. Do you swatch before casting on a new knitting project? Do we have any swatchers here? Oh, do you have a favorite cast on? I used German Twisted for a hat and it worked great. You know, I haven't tried German Twisted yet. I like the long tail cast on for a lot of things, but I like the cable cast on too, but I'll have to try the German twisted. I haven't done that one yet. Is it a really stretchy cast on? Okay, while I'm waiting for your answer, I'm going to jump right over and show you what I've been working on. Here we go. Been working on my master knitting program this week, so I have a few swatches that I've finished. This is a slip stitch swatch. This one's called Bricks. I know Stephen West is producing lots of patterns lately that use this sort of brick technique on his garments and shawls. It's really simple to do. It's just slip stitch. I think I have a video about this actually. And then elongated stitches. This one was really fun. You just wrap the yarn extra times and then drop them on the next row and you get these elongated sections. I really like that. I think I might work on a sweater, like a summer top pattern with some of that. That would be really fun. And intarsia. This one took me a while to do. This was a lot of work. Intarsia takes, well, you can see each ball, each little color is its own little section of yarn. You don't carry them or strand them across the back. So it's a lot of ends to weave in and lots of technical skill there trying to cross your yarns and keep everything nice. But I think it came out pretty good. So I've been working on those swatches and I just finished this. This is hard to see on there. There it is. It's a tube right now, but I think I want to attempt to turn this into a pair of socks. So I'm going to cut it right in half and then add the toes and heels, and I'll record it so you can see how it turns out. But the tube part was easy. I just used some wool yarn because that's really easy to cut and it won't unravel on you. So we'll have to do a video of that, I think. And I've been working on a new lace scarf. Let's see if I can pull it out here. I had a bit of, let me see, Classic Elite. They're discontinued now, but alpaca and bamboo in this yarn. It's really a nice yarn. It's really soft and nice and drapey. So working on a lace scarf. I don't really wear a lot of shawls. I never know how to wear them, but I like scarves. So that's coming along really well. And that's all I've been knitting. KZ, Kaz, what have you guys been knitting? Anybody else here that wants to jump in and tell us what they've been working on? Oh, so the German twisted cast on makes a nice finished edge. I'm going to have to look at that. I like the cast ons that look, like you say, just really nice and finished. They're part of the project, but they just make it look really professional. So what have you been knitting? Anything interesting? Get these projects out of my way. The Making Comfort shawl. Oh, I haven't heard of that one. Who designed that? Oh, Andrew Mowry has a nice video on the cast on. Okay, good. I'll have to look into that. She's got some good tutorial videos for her projects. The Making Comfort shawl. That sounds really nice. Oh, I have a few knitting books I'd like to share too while we're chatting. I just got this one I like to use my library a lot. We have a good library here. And this one, if you've ever wondered about Japanese knitting patterns, their patterns, they like to use charts. Let me see if I can find one here. The instructions are very short, and then they use the schematic for the instructions that will tell you how many to cast on there, how many rows to work. I find that really interesting. And then they use charts. They don't do written instructions for their row by row. So that is one thing. If you prefer written instructions, you are not going to find them in a lot of Japanese patterns. But I find this interesting, how the instructions are really short and they just use their schematics to explain things. I have another book coming that's in Japanese actually. But this one is interesting because they show you a technique, like here is entrelac, and they walk you through how to do it. And then they give you a few projects. Let me see if I can find. There's oh, that's really pretty, an entrelac shawl. So it's really interesting book, this one, the Japanese Wonder Knitting. They take a stitch pattern. You can see them on the cover here. And then they show you how to work that pattern, but then they give you a project or two that demonstrates how it could be used. So that's a really interesting book. If you have a good library, you can check that out, or if you like to buy your knitting books. And I had this one too from the library, Nora Gaughan's Twisted Stitch Sourcebook. I own her cable Sourcebook, and I wanted to check this one out, and it's very similar. Let's see if I can open it up here. Uses twisted stitches, not twisted like knitting through the back loop, but just crossing stitches, like one stitch over another stitch, that kind of twisted stitch. If you see here, you can see how the patterns move. So she's got patterns in here, and then she's also got these stitch charts with written instructions and charts. So this is really nice. She writes really good, clear instructions. And what's really cool, in the back, she walks you through how she creates new stitches, which I think is really interesting. And she's got some grids in there that you can use to design your own stitch patterns. So that's a really nice book if you're looking to add something to your collection and you like textured patterns. That's a good one to have too. Oh, Jill Zelensky made the designed the Making Comfort shawl. I'm gonna have to look that one up. That sounds really nice. Well, it is a 2-stitch cable, Celeste. That's really all it is. They're not twisted, like a twisted stitch where you actually twist them so the legs of the stitch are closed. But they're just 2-stitch cables. But the whole book, that's all it is. She uses these 2-stitch cables to create all of these. There's one right there. Oh, I'm not gonna glare. All of these beautiful designs, like that one. So the terminology is odd because they refer to them as twisted stitches because you're moving one stitch over another, but they're really not a twisted stitch where you're twisting the legs of the stitch. So you gotta love knitting. Like, every place has its own terminology, and some things are, you know, well, the long tail cast on has like 3 or 4 other names. Like, there's different names for things. So the terminology is odd because you're not really twisting the stitches. It's just a simple cable, one stitch over another. But yes, it is a really stunning book. The patterns are really nice, and the stitch patterns are beautiful. And I love that she shows you how to create your own. Nora Gaughan has her own atmosphere, Celeste. Yes, she is. She is. I really enjoy looking at her patterns. And the stitches she comes up with, you can tell she spends a lot of time just swatching. And I know that's something a lot of us don't like to do for projects and stuff, but to create these beautiful things, like, she's very talented. Okay, KZ, I have always wanted to make Norwegian mittens, but not at that skill level yet. You know, I haven't knit any of those either. I have a few in my Ravelry queue. I think, oh goodness, Camabornia Knits, I think I can't think of what her name is. I've watched it they're on YouTube. I've watched a few of her podcasts. She has some really beautiful colorwork mittens. I don't think they're Norwegian now that I think about it. But yes, I haven't knit any either. We'll have to find a pattern. Maybe we should have a knit along and do some Norwegian mittens. We do have a question about Fair Isle knitting, so we're going to tackle that. I think we'll go to our questions next. Oh, last week we had, let me see if I can get that up on the screen again. There we go. Last week's community question was about doing gauge swatches in the round when you're working a project in the round. And we had a couple of responses about that. PK made a good point that she noticed a difference in her gauge when she had been working a project flat, and then she had to switch to doing the sleeves in the round. So it is a good idea to swatch in the round. But all right, so we have a few questions to tackle that were submitted already. And then if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them here. Our first one, it was one that we had last week about fixing mistakes in a knit one below stitch. And we tackled this in our last episode. It's a, oh goodness, what's it called? Oh, Fisherman's Rib is the stitch pattern where you purl and then knit one below. And we discussed it last week, but I went immediately to like you really made a big mistake and you need to like drop down all your stitches and fix it. And I wondered after if maybe her mistake wasn't so severe and it was quite simple. And I did some more practicing, and it's difficult to drop down and fix Fisherman's Rib, this knit one below. Here, let's see if I can get this screen bigger. There we go. So I found another way to fix it. So if you're doing Fisherman's Rib or just a pattern that has a stitch, the knit one below stitch, I'll show you what that is right here too. So instead of knitting into the stitch on your needle, you're going to insert into the stitch underneath that one right there. That's the stitch underneath. You just look for the two legs of the stitch and insert right in the middle and drop this stitch off the needle. And it sort of creates a little collar on there, and it makes this really squishy texture. And that's a knit one below. But if you forget to make one or you need to fix one, in the last episode, I demonstrated dropping down and pulling everything out to fix it. But I realized after I was watching some mistakes in brioche, and they had, it was a Suzanne Bryan video, and she used stitch markers to hold all of those stitches so she wouldn't have to pick them up again. And I thought that was really interesting. And I realized you can apply the same thing to Fisherman's Rib. So all you need to do, like say your mistake was down here and you forgot to pick something up, you're not going to rip out everything. You're going to hold on to each of those stitches that should be on the top, because there's a stitch underneath there where the yarn is carried around it that makes that little collar. So what you want to do is try to maintain those stitches and keep them like that. And mine are staying pretty well, but if they weren't, you could put a stitch marker in there and hold them. Try to demonstrate this with this bulky yarn. Oops. Okay, so we've got one held, and we want to drop down a little more. So we would slowly pull that off, leaving the other stitch behind, that knit one below. And these are staying in place, so I'm just going to leave them like this. But if they were more slippery, you could put a stitch marker in each one, and that would hold them in place. And say I needed to go down and fix this stitch right here. There, I could go down. I could make my adjustments here. Like say I forgot to knit one below, then I could pick up that stitch. It's right here. This knit one below is right there. You could pick it up, and then all you would do, you get a crochet hook. All you would do is just treat it like you were going to pick up stitches, like if you dropped a stitch. Insert into those two and then pull that one through. And then the next one and pull it through. And that's all. So if you need to go down and fix a mistake, instead of last week I showed you how to rip it all out and pick it back up. If you don't want to do that, because that is tricky to do, then you can just try to keep those stitches with their little wraps on the back. There you go. And we just picked it back up again. This one's much easier to do. So this is the other trick. If it's not a terrible mistake and it's just small, then you can maintain, excuse me, you can maintain those stitches and just hold them on stitch markers and then pick them back up after you fixed your mistake. So I'm glad I went back and I did a little more research, because Fisherman's Rib is a bit tricky. If you've got mistakes to fix, then it's worth it to make a small swatch and practice before you try to fix that in a pattern. If you're knitting a blanket or a scarf and you've got to drop down and fix, there's a lot going on in that pattern. But I really dive deep into that in the last episode if you want to go back and check it out. I put timestamp links so you can hop right to that point in the video. Okay, and our second question was about Prettier mirrored increases. I just posted a video about doing mirrored increases, the rules that you need to follow. They have to be worked on the same row. They have to be leaning in different directions, and they have to be worked in the same position. There's a whole video about that. But Raquel wants to know if there's a way to make them prettier. And I did have a few comments about that. My first one was the dreaded S word, swatching. I know it's just a thing you've got to learn to love eventually, especially when you want to up your knitting game a little bit. It's a good idea to swatch different things if you want to make your increases or decreases, especially if you're trying to work them and stay in pattern. Say you're working a rib and you want to maintain that rib pattern, then the best thing to do is to swatch it out and see which increases and decreases you like best and where you want to place them so the pattern stays really nice the way you like it. And my second tip for her was to practice different techniques. There are lots of ways to make increases and decreases, and you might find that there's certain ones that you just love the look of, and we're all different. Some of us, might like to just do a yarn over and twist it closed, and some might really like the right and left lifted increases or the make ones. There's so many ways to work them, but the only way you'll know which one you like is to try them out. And there's lots of videos on YouTube that you can find all of those for. And my last tip about making them as neat as possible is to work them on the tips of your needles, especially something like an SSK. Here, let me go back to our knitting camera and I'll demonstrate this. Say you're working an SSK. Nope, I'm on the wrong end of my row here. Let me go back a little. And you want to keep it as neat as possible. This is what you don't want to do. Okay, let's say I want to work it right here. So first of all, if you've got your needles this far apart, you're creating extra space and you're stretching out your stitches. So the best thing to do is to keep them close together. The next thing you could do is when you're slipping, you've got your needles like this, really far apart. Then that's going to make it sloppier. So you want to keep them as close to the tips as possible. Just like this, like right on the edge. It's not a great place to work and decrease right here on the edge of my knitting, but that will help. Oops, and I dropped a stitch. That will help you create a neater decrease just by working on the tips of your needles. There's other ways to create them too, or to, let me see back here, or to make them a little neater, but really on the tips of your needles, and try to manipulate the stitches as little as possible, and that will keep them as small and neat as you can get them. But there are other fixes. I know Patty Lyons has something she calls a neater SSK. I think she has a video for that here on YouTube. I'll look for it after and put a link down below. But I haven't actually tried that, but I know a lot of people really like that technique. You can also, if you know where it's going to be placed, wrap the yarn the opposite way on the row before, and then you don't even need to slip the stitches. You can just knit them through the back legs, and that's really, you're not manipulating them at all, so it would stay really neat. But it's one of those things you need to swatch and practice, find the one you like. So that's really my only advice. If anybody has any other advice about that for neater increases and decreases, be sure to leave us a comment here. Okay, and our last question. Mary wants to know about Fair Isle knitting. She doesn't know where to start and what's a good way to practice. Oh, let me find my screen again. Sorry about that. There I am. Switch this one. Sorry, I'm trying to learn how to use this and I can't seem to get my screen, but I'll get it after. Okay, my advice for if you're new to Fair Isle or any stranded knitting where you've got 2 colors going at the same time or even more is to start with a project that only has a few colors. I would not dive right into something that uses 10 or 20 or, well, not 20, but well, I suppose there must be projects with that many colors. But don't start with something like that. Start with something that maybe uses 2 or 3 colors. And you can practice, that way you can practice how you want to hold both yarns. If you're going to hold them in separate hands or in the same hand, how you're going to carry the floats or catch the floats. You're not trying to wrangle all these different colors, you can just focus on the techniques. Then I do have 2 project recommendations. These are the projects I used when I was first practicing my Fair Isle techniques. There we go. The Learn to Knit Fair Isle hat from Stacy Perry at Very Pink Knits, and the Modern Stranded Knitting Techniques class with Mary Jane Mucklestone from Craftsy. Those are both really great classes. They only use, well, the hat uses 2 colors and the cowl uses 3. So I'll put links for those down below, but those they're small projects, so you're not trying to knit a whole sweater and practice your color work. They're small enough that you can manage what's going on, and you don't have a lot of different colors that you're trying to wrangle. Does anybody have any recommendations for Fair Isle projects that would be easy for somebody who wants to just learn how to do it? Oh, thanks, Ange. I hope I do too. And Celeste, it finally dawned on me that I'm a process knitter when I really focused on why I don't do more than 1 swatch. If it's close enough, I just knit on. So far, all of my sweaters fit. 5, you've made 5 sweaters this year. Wow, that's good. That's really good progress. Goodness. Oh, in the pandemic. So you mean since during the last year, 5 sweaters. That's really great. So you're a process knitter. Yes. Do we have more process knitters, or are you project knitters? You really want the thing that you knit, or do you like, I think I'm a combination of both, but really process. I choose projects based on if I find them interesting or it's a new technique I want to practice. So I guess I'm more of a process knitter. And it doesn't bother me if I'm done and I really didn't want the thing, I will rip the yarn out and use it again for something else. I sew sometimes too, and I realize you can't do that with sewing. Once it's done, it's done. You can't go take it apart and do something else with it. So I really like with knitting that I can do that, especially if you mess up. If you're sewing, once you cut that fabric, then that's it. But if you're knitting, then you can just take it out and try it again. Okay, so that was it for questions that were submitted ahead of time. But if anybody has any questions, go ahead and pop them in there and we'll try to answer them. I'll do my best, or if it's something that I've got to research, then I will save it and we'll do it in the next live stream. So if anybody has any questions, I'll give it a few more minutes. Oh, I can show comments. This is new. I've never used this program for things before. So there you are, Celeste. You're a process knitter. I love that. So while we're waiting for your questions, we do have a community question for our next episode. I'd love to have your answers for this so I can share them with the viewers for next week. Let's see if I can put that up on the screen. There we go. Do you have a reference book that you would recommend for new knitters? Now, I know we probably all have lots of reference books, but I really want to focus on ones that would be good for those who are just starting or who want, or maybe intermediate level at most, nothing that's going to confuse them too much. But good, like I like the Vogue Knitting reference book. I think that's a good one, or their quick reference book is another good one for new knitters. But if you have any, I'd love to know about them. If you want to pop them in the chat or leave a comment down below for the next live stream. Oh, thank you, KZ. I'm glad. I love doing this. Video was a bit hard to learn at first, and using all this software is a learning process, but it's pretty fun, and I really like, well, I love to knit and I love to teach. So I think that is it for now, if we don't have any more questions. Well, our next episode will be in 2 weeks on Wednesday, same time, same place. So I'd love it if you were here again and chatting with me and sharing your knitting questions and your answers and your projects. So see you in 2 weeks.